Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. Today, a trial was ordered for a man accused of killing his 2-year-old stepson more than a decade ago. Jahi Turner vanished in 2002. His body was never found. His stepfather, Tyree Jones, said the boy disappeared at a park, but prosecutors say Jahi was either accidentally or intentionally injured. And they say Jones failed to get him medical help. Jones will be tried for murder and child abuse. The trial is set for April. People calling 911 for emergencies in San Diego are getting through quicker. A new study report finds that in November, 911 dispatchers answered calls within 10 seconds, 93% of the time. This was a 26% improvement from April, when 67% of calls were answered within that time frame. This beats the national target of 90%. The mayor's office credits improvements to help retain dispatchers, including pay raises and backup from officers trained to assist the call center. Before this, San Diego dispatchers were nearly the lowest paid in the state. Today, federal lawmakers stepped up to protect immigrants. Senator Richard Durbin and Lindsey Graham introduced the Bridge Act. It would bar the removal of immigrants currently protected by DACA, the Deferred Action for Children Arrivals. The Obama administration implemented the program for people brought to the U.S. illegally as children from being deported. The Bridge Act would not give anyone permanent status, but it would allow so-called dreamers to continue to work and go to school in the U.S. President Obama wants a full CIA report on the degree of cyber intrusion on the presidential election before he leaves office. This week, he instructed the intelligence community to conduct an investigation into malicious cyber activity related to the November elections. The government has already determined there was an attempt to interfere with the election. Now they want to know to what extent.
This past October, the intelligence community made very clear that this was activity directed by the highest levels of the Russian government. So as we've made clear, we are committed to ensuring the integrity of our elections, and this report will dig into this pattern of malicious cyber activity timed to our elections, take stock of our defensive capabilities, and capture lessons learned to make sure that we brief members of Congress and stakeholders as appropriate.
White House officials say the probe is intended to improve the U.S. defense against cyber attacks, not to question the legitimacy of President-elect Donald Trump's victory. 75% of California voters cast a ballot last month. The Secretary of State released turnout information today. It was the highest voter turnout since 2008, when Barack Obama was elected president. We're nearing the start of tax season, and the IRS is warning people to watch out for scams. Tax scams take many forms. It could be a call from someone claiming to be the IRS demanding immediate payment, or it could be someone trying to file a return in your name to claim your refund.
You know, in this case, we have two victims. We have the consumer that's a victim of fraud on their account, but we also have the IRS that's a victim of being perpetrated to send money to the wrong end user. So it really benefits us to try to get our tax money in early.
San Diego's Better Business Bureau is working with the IRS on tax security awareness. Filing season begins January 23rd. A biotech company's stock prices rose after new clinical trial data leaked at a conference currently being held in San Diego. KPBS science reporter David Wagner has details.
The conference scheduled Biogen to present results from a study of its experimental Alzheimer's drug this morning. Reporters were asked to withhold coverage of the data until Biogen's presentation. But reporters covering the conference say results were widely distributed ahead of time, and an overview of the results was also publicly accessible on the conference's website on Thursday. Biogen's stock price went up yesterday as word of the positive results spread prematurely. Adam Feuerstein, a senior columnist at financial news website The Street, says the conference really bungled the release of these results.
The law says that you have to disclose that data equally to all investors at the same time. What happens in cases like this is that the data is selectively disclosed. So people who happen to be at the conference or have access to those data in some way are getting an edge.
The conference organizers did not respond to a request for comment. David Wagner, KPBS News.
California public schools need to hire more bilingual instructors, but there's already a shortage of teachers. Proposition 58's passage last month allows bilingual teaching in public schools. Now, more public schools need to hire teachers who speak more than one language, while also fixing their shortage of teachers, too.
We have a tremendous teacher shortage just by itself, and with this, we'll have a tremendous teacher shortage in bilingual education once we start that kind of program.
California lost about 1/3 of its bilingual education teachers when English-only teaching was mandated in 1998. Officials say they'd like to retain some of the teachers already in the system. A majority of Californians are worried about college costs, says a new poll by the Public Policy Institute of California. 57% of Californians are worried about rising tuition prices. This comes after California State University says it might raise tuition. While Californians disagree on how to fix the problem, there's no dispute there needs to be more funding.
But really where we saw even higher levels of support, including across all party groups, was in just increasing government funding for scholarships and grants for students.
Pollsters say Californians think solutions to increased tuition could be free community college and more scholarships. After nearly 70 years of taking California's political pulse, the Field poll is shutting down, effective today. The polling company surveyed voters on a wide range of subjects from the presidential races to social issues. The Field poll was considered one of the best polls in the nation, but shrinking revenues led to the parent company shutting it down. A San Diego City official talks to us about what's next after leading the city council. Today, I sat down with Sherry Leitner. The San Diego City Council president shared what she considers to be some of her biggest accomplishments over the years.
In 2010, brought forward a ballot measure called Proposition C, which allowed for the build-out of Pacific Highlands Ranch, which now has blossomed to include the Solana Ranch Park, a middle school and elementary school. The sites for the library and the community park have been secured, and the complete development of the Village Loop Shopping Center, along with several hundred affordable housing units.
We also spoke to her about her last month in office marked with controversy as she unsuccessfully took on Airbnb and similar short-term rental companies.
Are they permitted? And if they're not permitted, they're illegal, and that question was not answered, although I think it sort of was at the hearing, because they're not permitted. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having a motion to develop regulations.
Tune in Monday to Midday Edition for a full interview with Councilwoman Sherry Leitner. Host Maureen Cavanaugh will talk to Leitner on her last official day in office and find out what's next for her after 8 years on the San Diego City Council. That's Monday at noon on KPBS Radio.
San Diego legislators are gearing up to fight the Trump administration. Retired Marine General James Mattis is chosen as new defense secretary, and people with felony convictions for pot are getting out of prison. Join us for the KPBS Roundtable tonight at 8:30.
When new moms return to work, breastfeeding often goes by the wayside. That's because pumping breast milk requires frequent breaks, the right equipment, and privacy. In the final installment of our 3-part series on breastfeeding, KPBS health reporter Kenny Goldberg tells us what California employers are doing to make things easier.
It's num-num time.
If you think breastfeeding is simple and trouble-free, think again.
Gotta make sure mama's comfortable.
Trish Taylor breastfeeds her baby, Dwayne Taylor III. They call him D3 for short.
You gotta eat the num-nums.
Taylor's living room is chock full of devices and supplements that help her breastfeed successfully.
I pumped with this last night. I take these daily. I drink my tea daily. I pump after every feeding. I weigh him at least once a day to see how he's growing. These are things that I have to use regularly.
Taylor also uses disposable nursing pads, creams, you name it.
Of course, this stuff isn't convenient. Of course, it gets annoying. Sometimes you want to pull your hair out. But at the end of the day, my son and I are building a really strong bond, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says Taylor is on the right track. The agency recommends that all babies be exclusively breastfed for the first 6 months. On average, however, California women aren't coming close to that goal. In fact, surveys show the rate of exclusive breastfeeding takes a big dive when babies hit the 3-month mark. That's about the time when many women have to return to work.
Yeah, we have a meeting here, so I'll pump there.
Christine Vaughn came back to her job at Cal State San Marcos when her daughter Kenzie was 3.5 months old. Kenzie is now 8 months old, and Vaughn is still breastfeeding her. Vaughn says pumping her milk on the job requires a lot of work. The night before, she has to clean and pack up her equipment, and she has to remember to bring it to the office the next day.
And then really pumping begins well before I actually even get to work. What's the last time I fed my daughter in the morning is usually a big indicator of when I'm going to pump when I'm here.
When it's time to pump, she grabs her special bag and goes upstairs to a private room. Vaughn ends up pumping about every 2 to 3 hours. Sometimes she has to juggle her schedule to make it happen. California law requires employers to provide lactating women a reasonable amount of break time to pump and a private space to do it in.
It's tough enough for women to pump their breast milk at an office, but what about when they're traveling? Talk about a hassle. Fortunately, California law requires all major airports to have lactation rooms.
This is our Terminal 2 lactation room for nursing mothers who would be traveling. Inside we have soft lighting as well as decor that's very gentle, calming and soothing, everything that a nursing mother would need when they are traveling.
Spokeswoman Rebecca Bloomfield says there are 3 lactation rooms at San Diego International Airport. She says with 20 million passengers coming through every year, the rooms are an important amenity. If it sounds like California is a paradise for working moms who nurse, keep this in mind. Employers can refuse to provide pumping breaks and a private space if they determine it would seriously disrupt their operations.
Heart rate sounds good. I don't hear any murmurs.
Dr. Nancy White is a neonatologist and co-founder of the San Diego County Breastfeeding Coalition.
Right. And the milk supply, how's that coming?
It's awesome.
She says by and large, it's the smaller employers that opt out.
For example, it's very hard to replace somebody for a 20-minute or 30-minute break to pump if you're on an assembly line. And so, unfortunately, the very women and babies who can most benefit from human milk are the ones that don't tend to get it because it's too hard to work it into the system.
And then there are people who are uncomfortable with women breastfeeding in public. A recent nationwide survey from the CDC found 13% of respondents were against the practice.
Some people don't believe it's natural. They believe it's nasty, and I've had congressmen tell me, well, I don't pee in public, so why should you breastfeed in public? I don't think the two are equivalent, but I can't get that across to some people.
Turn on the pump.
That doesn't faze Christine Vaughn. She's planning to breastfeed her daughter Kenzie for at least a year.
The hope would be that as a mom, as an employee, that you're able to reach the goal you set for yourself. And I think when moms are unable to do that, it's very hard. It's hard because in some way you almost feel like you're failing as a mother, and that's a hard place to be.
Kenny Goldberg, KPBS News.
I'm Judy Woodruff. On the next NewsHour, follow along as we conclude our series, A Few Good Women, tracing 3 courageous females vying for the toughest combat positions, Friday on the PBS NewsHour.
This week, we've been looking at the environmental legacy of World War II, which started for us 75 years ago with the attack on Pearl Harbor. The war created a huge demand for lumber. It also took away thousands of men needed to trek into the forest wielding axes. But a new technology would help the timber industry's depleting labor force. It was a revolutionary new invention: the one-man chainsaw. Producer Jess Burns of EarthFix looks at how the war shaped the new technology, leading to the greatest cutting of the Pacific Northwest.
The chainsaw. The most iconic modern symbol of logging. But it wasn't always the case. For a century in the Northwest, men in the woods labored with axes and handsaws, launching a massive industry.
The timber brought capital. The timber brought a transportation network. Timber brought people. The beginning of the Northwest as a region had everything to do with timber.
But cutting and preparing trees for transport to the mills was slow, needing large crews. As demand grew, companies quickly cut through all the easy-to-access forests. Timber bosses looked to innovation to move deeper into the woods and speed up the cut. But it took a great war to push the iconic chainsaw into the hands of the Northwest logger.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced.
The war and the chainsaw set the industry up for the largest timber harvest in modern U.S. history. Timber was a major commodity of war. Wood was needed for every aspect of the war effort. For airplanes and hangars, barracks and buildings, trucks, bridges, warships and barges, and shipping crates. The acute need for wood prompted the United States to exempt loggers from the draft. A timber industry workforce that was decimated by the Great Depression suddenly had more work than it could handle, but still some of the most clunky and rudimentary tools available to get the job done. At Wayne Sutton's Chainsaw Museum, the entire history of the saw is on display.
If you were talking the chainsaws prior to the war, you would be someplace where they had typically an electric machine. They had big generators mounted on crawlers or tractors of some sort, and the cords were the size of a garden hose.
These were two-man monstrosities, and there was some hesitation on the part of loggers to take them on.
One of the things they complained about was the noise, that the early chainsaws were loud, they were nasty, they spit oil, they spit gas.
But the war helped change that mentality.
And those people that went into the war, the young guys, came off of farms. They'd been working with horses, and many of them very little knowledge of equipment and machines. But when the war came along, they were exposed to other kinds of equipment beyond what their wildest dreams were.
Some men were even given chainsaws to use in the war effort, clearing paths through European and Asian forests for troops and equipment. At the request of the military, a small Wisconsin company called Mercury built that saw using a German saw as a model.
They went into the civilian market as soon as the war was over, and he sold piles of them.
The technology and manufacturing capacity was improving because of the war effort. The two-man chainsaws were giving way to lighter one-man versions, thanks to the development of aluminum and magnesium alloys, strong, light materials.
But the fact that, a chainsaw now becomes a lot cheaper and a lot more easy to manufacture has to do with this new industrial infrastructure created as a consequence of the war.
With a trained workforce, the chainsaw, and other technology, the timber industry was primed and prepared for the post-war economic boom. Paul Skirvin had been too young to enlist, but when World War II ended, he started a logging company that was in business for a half-century. He got his first chainsaw in the late 1940s.
Doing it this way, you got tired, the sweat rolled off too. After you got a power saw, man, just zip it a lot faster, 10, 5, 8 times faster.
The timber boom was huge in the prosperity that followed the war.
Some businesses are moving to the low-rent outskirts. And so are families which can afford houses in the country.
They hollered about progress, but they kept building more houses, and you had to keep producing more because they was building more houses. And as saws come into existence, well, man, it made you even more productive. Yeah, you do a lot more, shorter length of time.
Billions of board feet were being cut from Northwest forests.
If you live in a house made in the 1950s, 1960s, I could almost guarantee it's Washington or Oregon lumber that built that house.
And those forests have paid an ecological price for the heavy harvest of the post-war era. Fish and wildlife habitat was decimated. By the mid-1990s, as much as 90% of old-growth forests were gone. Now the cut is lower and much more regulated. As a result, an industry that transformed itself with the chainsaw is once again looking to technology to adapt to new environmental expectations. And there's still room for newcomers to make their mark. Matt Hagerberg is the newest generation of logger.
Essentially what we do are the more sensitive and more difficult jobs.
These thinning, restoration, and fire treatment jobs are available, and it's innovative equipment that makes his business work.
Because we do deal with smaller timber, we aren't dealing with great big trees with no limbs on them. It takes a lot of work to get the volume.
One man can cut down a tree in just a few seconds. Then it only takes a few more to shear off the limbs and cut it to length. But still, it's a man with a chainsaw that's called in when the ground is too steep, the brush is too thick, or the ecosystem too fragile for large machines.
It plays a very important role in what we do. We keep one in every single one of our pickups. We use them almost daily.
And even today, when logging is more hands-off than ever before, no self-respecting logger would go to a job site without a chainsaw in tow.
That story comes to us from EarthFix, an environmental reporting project made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The sun will be out in San Diego this weekend, but don't put away your sweaters just yet. Stephanie Omo has more in tonight's forecast.
It's been another quiet day throughout the southern portion of California, of course, San Diego and much of the surrounding areas. Seeing a little bit more in the way of cloud cover into the nighttime hours. Up toward the north is where we have this trough that's passing through northern California. Notice it's depositing some rain showers in some areas in northern cities here away from us. And because of it, well, we do have a chance, a very small possibility to see some of those showers sneak in as we head into the weekend. So just a little closer look of our area. Satellite and radar showing us some cloud cover just rolling through patches of clouds in our area from Ramona all the way down to San Diego, and even out east into Mount Laguna as we slowly begin to wrap up the day today. So tonight, temperatures will be back down to at around 57 degrees, so a bit milder for tonight. Typically, we'll see lows drop back down into the 40s. We're looking at plenty of clouds in the area here in the metro area, of course. As we check out the forecast for tonight across our county in Borrego Springs, looking at patches of clouds there down to Mount Laguna. Really not a whole lot going on in Ramona. Temperatures tonight at 45 degrees. Oceanside 50, San Diego at 57, and over into Chula Vista, we're looking at overnight lows to drop to at around 55. For the first part of the weekend, remember I spoke about that trough sliding a little bit toward the south. We have that moisture in place, so we will see welcomed rain across northern California, even into central areas. Could see some rain there in San Francisco, but still remaining a bit quiet in our area, even back into parts of the Four Corners region around New Mexico and also into Arizona. Now, eventually, let's say around Saturday night and into early Sunday, we do have that small chance for a couple of showers to sneak a little bit to the south, making it into San Diego. As we check out your snapshot for early next week, the bulk of the precipitation remains up to our north. Many areas to the south remains dry early next week. Throughout much of California, that just expands all the way out east into the southern plains with a high pressure system remaining in place. So as we check out your 5-day outlook along the coast on Saturday, once again, we'll see a little bit more in the way of clouds, temperatures near average. We'll keep it like that as we finish up the weekend on Sunday, looking at patches of clouds in the area. Looking a little bit more sunnier here as we head into Monday, starting up the new work week, and we'll keep it sunny through Wednesday there. A little bit further inland, also looking at some cloud cover Saturday and into Sunday, and looking a little bit better as we head into Monday through Wednesday with that sunshine sticking around, and temperatures really not too bad either as we head into early next week. Your 5-day outlook into the mountain here, we're looking at more clouds than sun building on Saturday once again because of that disturbance up toward the north. Temperatures just taking a tumble a bit on Sunday, 55 degrees, decreasing clouds, sunny skies Monday through Wednesday, and temperatures should remain in the middle 50s. And then we check out last but not least here the 5-day outlook for the deserts here, remaining a bit quiet, looking at partly sunny skies through the weekend. Relatively nice conditions here, especially on Sunday. Temperatures will be at 75 degrees. Stephanie Omo, KPBS News.
Take a tour of the state capitol and you'll see hundreds of trees, but only one of those trees has been to the moon. Caitlin Lewis of Capitol Television News Service has the report.
We have liftoff with Apollo 14.
Lifting off in 1971, the crew of Apollo 14 brought with them hundreds of seeds. After landing on the moon, the crew and their seeds returned to Earth. And in 1976, one of those seeds was planted right here at the state capitol. Nestled in a grove just to the left of the Capitol's north entrance, there's a tree, seemingly no different than the other coastal redwoods around it. But look a little closer.
This tree, a redwood tree, as a seed, went to the moon and came back.
As a seed, the tree was carried by astronaut Stuart Roosa. Rusa, former U.S. forester, conducted science experiments while in space. The tiny seed was one of those experiments.
Whoever at NASA thought about this was a genius, because NASA needs a lot of budget and a lot of money. So why not connect America to this mission?
Extraordinary in its beginnings, the now 45-year-old moon tree is almost inconspicuous in its tiny growth, needing very little help to stay alive.
When we redesigned the security kiosks after the 9/11 attack, we actually made this one a little bit different shape than the one on the other side to accommodate this tree.
Now left to itself, the thin 120-foot tree reaches, branch by branch, across space to a faraway place it's been before.
And look at it now. It's growing to the moon.
Reporting at the Capitol, Caitlin Lewis.
You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend.